Alright, here's my Module 9 case study. As we look at a summary of the case, basically what happens is an assistant principal that's working to promote a good rapport with a group of students that struggles. He stays and plays basketball with the kids to build that rapport. And has made good progress with a handful of kids, especially the kid that's mentioned in the case study, James. At one point during the school day, a teacher reports that James is seen handing something to another student, David, who is an honor student and part of the orchestra and many positive things and never been in trouble through the school to this point. James is seen handing something to David. It was thought to be drugs. So the assistant principal brings both kids in with a police officer to supervise. It is found that David has a set of brass knuckles, to which he is getting arrested for having a weapon on school grounds. The assistant principal, Richard, regrets his decision to bring the police officer in because James admits that he bullied David into taking the knuckles to hold him while at school, so he didn't get caught with them. But then both kids end up getting sent to an alternative education center. Long story short, Richard is wanting to go back on his decision to an extent and not getting David sent there because he's never had issues and he's in a lot of ways a victim in the situation by being bullied and doesn't believe he should be expelled. Then the director of secondary education comes down and says that Richard needs to follow through with the expulsion, to which he's at a crossroads morally and ethically. So as you look at the legal and or ethical issues with it happening on school grounds, both kids were in possession of the weapon at some point. It's not really known if David could have put it somewhere else, and so it wasn't in his possession. It's not officially known that James bullied him or not, whether they're friends and he's covering for him. But there's, as it's mentioned in there, Richard has good reason to believe that James was telling the truth. But as I mentioned, the legal issues with it are having a weapon on school grounds. And that's a felony for both kids. So they could both be arrested and sent to the alternative education. One of the ethical sides of it is back to, like I mentioned, whether or not David is a victim or not. If he is bullied, to an extent, it's not his fault that he had the brass knuckles. So just deciphering what to do for the best of both students in that case. As we look at it, Richard mentions in there that both kids have shown personal growth through the situation already. I think David's got a reality check a little bit, that not all kids probably have it as good as he may have it. I don't know that he necessarily has it any better than others, but his current situation definitely is assumed that it's better than James's. But now Richard is in an ethical and legal decision that he has to make for both kids. As you look at the facts, there's two students, a police officer, director of secondary of education is mentioned. If the director of secondary education was mentioned, my assumption is that there were other higher ups within the school and even possibly the school board that were already brought into the situation and made aware of it, although they're not mentioned. Three key characters, they're all males. Richard, the principal, James, and David. And their race, I don't believe was mentioned. It happened at a suburban area school, 900 students. It was mentioned that the south side was a difficult area for a lot of students, that a lot of kids got caught up and lost their way in. They're all working to keep those kids off that path. Takes place at a junior high. It doesn't mention it, but I'm assuming either 6th through 8 or 7th through 8th grade. So, and again, it wasn't mentioned. My interpretation was that it was public school, not private. As we review and prioritize info, anytime you have an employee going against a policy, I think you have to look at both sides of it, whether the policy is good and the person that's going against the policy is just disobedient and not doing something ethical. I think you have to look at the person's heart and communicate with what their motives are for doing what they're doing and the stance that they're taking. Um, as you look at all the facts and everything. So, in this case, it appears that Richard is looking out for the best of both students, with David being an honor student and just his mentality and his stature, going to an alternative education likely would not be in his best interest, especially if he were the victim of a bullying situation. So, um, as you look at it, something that came up that I thought of was just the utilitarian mindset. As you look at what's best for as many kids as you can have, um, and also the least damaging to the kids. So it may not be the best situation, but um, even if you can't change a policy, but you can, or can't fix it for David, but you can change a policy to help a future student, that would be beneficial. So just looking at, as I mentioned before, communicating with your higher ups, superiors, as you're combating a policy. That way, you're not just going rogue and deciding to do your own thing. So, I outlined a couple options. Initially, when I read the case study, I thought of two options. He can um, expel James and not David, or you can expel both. As I kind of looked at some other options, I came up with 5 different options. One is take no action at all in regard to both students. Whether that's really an option or not with the police officer, having been there, I don't know that, but I just put that down. So option 2, move forward with documentation for both, expelling both students for a minimum of 45 days. Option 3, move forward with discipline for James and stand firm on doing nothing to David as he took his initial stance. As you look at option 4, I start bringing in conversations with superiors. As an assistant principal, I know it mentioned Richard was an assistant principal. Um, Something I would need to look more into is just whether or not he can disclose information on the case with his superiors. I'm assuming he can. So having that discussion with your head principal to see what their thoughts are could be a valuable conversation to have. And option 4 kind of leads to option 5. If you and the principal can't come up with a solution that works best for everybody moving forward, then I think you could potentially bring in school boards or the school board members, superintendent of the school, just assuming that it's structured the same as many other school districts. So as you look at the evaluation of those options, option 1, no action at all. Obviously, there's some pros to that, but it's more or less just kind of being lazy, not doing anything. It may actually be beneficial for David because that would be the route that Richard is looking at taking in his case anyway. But then when you look at James, and does it enable him? Is he actually learning from the situation if he gets off scot-free? So I don't think that's a great option. Doing nothing, ignore school policy as well as legal issues. Option 2, expulsion for both. James likely has a more of a learning experience from that, getting sent to that alternative education. It was mentioned that he had already learned and stepped up for his behavior, taken accountability for it, so that was beneficial. It follows both legal and school policies to just go by the book with the situation. When you look at the cons, I don't think it weighs all the factors of the situation. Are you punishing a victim? Um, and if David was really bullied into the situation, then I don't know that he should necessarily be punished for it. Um, and then lastly, you look, and if the policy is something that you deem to be a broken policy, just going by the policy, as it happens here, I mean, you start infringing on ethical standards, whether those are the same ethical standards across the board for the district or not. You just run into some other issues if you just allow a broken policy to stay broken instead of addressing it with your superiors and working to change it for the betterment of all the students. Option 3, expel James, no discipline for David. Pros to this, most appropriate outcome for both, in my opinion. It pushes for positive changes in the policy as um, as Richard is pushing against and stretching it, and I'm assuming at some point he's going to have communication with the higher ups after the fact to look at changing the policy, hopefully. So cons doesn't align with the current school policy. It would potentially put have some legal issues arise for David, whether they can just drop charges on it. I'm not sure what all goes into that decision. As far as the school district, I am guessing an assistant principal isn't allowed if there's charges being brought on a student. That an assistant principal probably isn't the one making those decisions. And it may not involve all the necessary decision-making parties. So if it's just Richard deciding this and it stays in his office, then that could be problematic if everyone's not on board with the same decision and aware of what's going on. Somebody could get blindsided by an upset parent, stakeholder, board member, whatever, could cause future problems too. So, and then option 4 and 5, I have those kind of leading into each other. So I grouped those together. As you start bringing in the principal and school board, I think that's best for the transparency of the decision-making process. There's nothing being hidden. Richard is able to basically outline his thoughts on it and say, this is what I think. This is where my heart's at. I think this is what's best for both students. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Where they can kind of see, and then that could drive change for that policy, like I have mentioned below. And the biggest thing with involving some other people is it could result in the best outcome for everyone involved. It could allow James to go to the alternative education and learn his lesson in an appropriate fashion. It could allow David to remain, remove a bully from the school environment. And it could also allow for them to look at that policy and revise it if needed. Lastly, last pro I have is it involves multiple opinions. You can start brainstorming different ideas to address the issue. Cons, it may take the decision out of Richard's hands if he's actually able to decide, okay, this is what I know is best for David. Then I think he would need to make that decision. However, once you start bringing your superiors in, that decision could come out of your hands and then result in a poor outcome for David. I have involves multiple opinions on here again as a con. Sometimes you get too many sticks in the fire and it ends up being a bad thing and counterproductive. So, not that would necessarily be the case with a school board or a principal, but it could possibly turn that way. And then you look at another con is a possible legal exception.